Coast Guard leadership pressuring them not to speak out or even post support online for Sarah and her colleagues, who were also interviewed. In the McClatchy 5-part investigative series that was printed recently in 29 daily newspapers in 14 states. Service members everywhere have bravely raised their voices to demand accountability, to call out their perpetrators, and demand change now. Their voices are a warning to those who deny the problem, who glorify a culture not of honor, duty, and respect, but a culture imbued with misogyny and reticence to change. And this is my warning. Sexual harassment, sexual assault, retaliation are never acceptable. Find solutions, fix problems, get out of the way, because as John Lewis would call us to do, then get in the way. We will not continue to lose soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines because of the sexual harassment is one of the most pervasive and degrading facts of military life, unquote. Now, this is a quote from a female service member in a story in the Washington Post in 1980. That was 40 years ago. Little has changed in those 40 years, except we have thrown a lot of money at this problem. I estimate it's close to $1 billion now. And what do we have to show for it? Well, we're going to explore that today. I've spent 10 years on this issue. I don't take any pride in the numbers going down or going up, because frankly, not much has changed. For all that we have done, not much has changed. We haven't fixed it. And until we get very serious about this, nothing is going to change. I want to thank the panels that are here today, and we will be hearing from you shortly. Before we introduce the first panel, let me introduce Ranking Member Kelly for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spear, and thank you for holding this important hearing on this important topic today. Thank you to our panelists today for coming in and sharing your findings. I think it's vitally important that we understand completely any positive or negative trends across DOD and down at Fort Hood. And I think both panels today will help us get perspective on that. Sexual harassment is a scourge across society, rooted in ignorance and disrespect that has no place in our military. When young men and women put up their hand and swear the oath to protect our Constitution and country, they do it with the understanding, belief that they protect us and that we will protect them. We will protect their dignity, honor their sacrifice, recognize and defend their professionalism. Sexual harassment, like any exploitation or maltreatment, undermines that commitment and dishonors the sacrifices they make for each and every one of us in this nation. When I was a company, battalion, brigade commander in the Army, I dealt with sexual harassment in my formations. And it pained me to see all too often young female soldiers disrespected and sometimes exploited just because of their gender. I learned that the only way to counter this insidious threat was quick and decisive action at every level in the chain of command and fighting to establish a culture of intolerance for sexual harassment. Sexual harassment demeans the service of these victims who are more professional, capable, and committed than those who seek to victimize them. And while true that sexual harassment is a societal problem, that doesn't mean we can accept any lesser levels of harassment in the military and call it a victory. The military is better than that, grounded in common values that have no place for harassment, disrespect, or exploitation of other service members or anyone outside of the service for that matter. Any level of sexual harassment is unacceptable. Reporting may be trending favorably, and that is vitally important so leaders can illuminate and eradicate problems. And prevention and response may be improving, but any level of harassment is too much. We need to find creative ways for educating and empowering leaders at all levels and our most valuable vulnerable populations of service members to shape culture of intolerance and set conditions for effective prevention and response at all levels. I'm particularly interested in hearing from our panelists any ideas for how we can make that happen, how we can make institutional change across DOD, because our service members deserve our full attention and every effort we can muster to counter the corrosive impact of any level of sexual harassment. I think it has to be personal. It has to be not in my Army, not in my Navy, not in my Coast Guard, which we don't have, but it's just still not in my Air Force, not in my Marine Corps. And that has got to permeate through every senior leader, every senior non-commissioned officer from the sergeant major of each of those services on down. And we have to make sure that we won't tolerate it from anyone, not in my Army, not in my DOD. Thank you again to our panelists. I look forward to a productive discussion today. Thanks again, Chairwoman Spear, for calling this hearing, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Each witness will have the opportunity to present his or her testimony, and each member will have an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. We respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize their testimony in 5 minutes or less. Your written comments and statements will be made part of the hearing record. I ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate and ask questions after the subcommittee members have had the opportunity to ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. There are also members of the House who are here who are not members of the Armed Services Committee. I would ask that they too have the opportunity to ask questions after the subcommittee members. Without objection, so ordered. Let me now welcome our first panel, Dr. Nate Galbraith, the Deputy Director of Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, SAPRO, at the U.S. Department of Defense. And we will then hear from Colonel Patrick Wimpey, Command Inspector General, U.S. Armed Forces Command, FORSCOM. Thank you very much. You may begin.
Madam Chair Spear, Ranking Member Kelly, members of the subcommittee, and other members, good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. For the last 3 decades, I have committed my life to supporting and caring for child victims and adult victims of violent crime. Since 2007, my efforts have focused on prevention and response to sexual assault. I wish that circumstances were different and that we were not here to discuss the loss of a service member, a soldier, a daughter. Even with my 30 years investigating violent crime, supporting victims, and counseling the wounded, nothing prepares one for situations like this. The murder of Specialist Vanessa Guillen has touched us all in some way, but no one feels the loss more than her family. I can only hope that the groundswell of support and love and compassion and even inspiration that's come from about in the last few weeks in Vanessa's name can bring some comfort for those that loved and knew her. Nadie debería sufrir lo que esta familia ha sufrido, which for the record means that no one should suffer what this family has suffered. My organization, the Department of Defense Sexual Assault Prevention Response Office, or SAPRO, establishes policy and conducts oversight on efforts to assist victims of sexual assault, encourage greater reporting, empower survivors to recover, and prevent the crime. While harassment policy, criminal investigation, and the military justice system fall outside my portfolio, we are keenly aware of how these issues play a critical role in our work to prevent and respond to sexual assault, and to allow those who choose to make a report to do so without fear of retaliation. Although more work remains, many of our efforts have resulted in certain progress. As many of you know, the department has 2 key metrics in the sexual assault program. First, estimated prevalence, or how often the crime occurs, is a number we want to go down. And second, the number of reports we want to go up, which means that more victims are coming forward to connect with care and support services, as well as aid our efforts to hold offenders appropriately accountable. The data tells us that the estimated prevalence rates of sexual assault in the Department of Defense have decreased by over 1/3 in the past 14 years, and reporting of sexual assault is 4 times what it was in 2006. However, in our most recent active duty survey in 2018, we saw an increase in the prevalence of sexual assault for women. In addition, in that year, about 24% of women and 6% of men on active duty indicated experiencing behavior consistent with sexual harassment in the year before being surveyed. We know we must do more. Fear of retaliation complicates and degrades our efforts to encourage greater reporting of misconduct and connect service members with restorative care. While not all behaviors perceived to be retaliatory by someone constitute retaliation that is actionable, all behaviors, actionable or not, gravely undermine our efforts in this space and are incongruent with our expectations for dignity and respect. To be blunt, such behaviors are absolutely unacceptable and have no place in a military that is striving for greater dignity, respect, and inclusion for all. In sum, achieving and sustaining progress requires continuous institutional examination, reflection, and evolution. We acknowledge the gap between where we are now and where the department desires to be. We are committed to working towards lasting, impactful cultural change. Again, thank you for your commitment and support to the men and women who serve our nation, and I look forward to your questions.
Colonel Wimpey.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Kelly, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, good morning. As the Inspector General for Army Forces Command, or FORSCOM, I appreciate the invitation to share information and insights from our inspection of the SHARP program and command climate conducted at Fort Hood, Texas from June 29th to July 3rd, 2020. Let me begin by expressing my sincerest condolences to the Guillen family. As a soldier and as a father, I cannot fathom the acute sorrow and grief that they are feeling over the loss of their daughter and their sister. What happened to Vanessa is tragic and should never happen to a daughter, a sister, or to a soldier. You have my profound sympathy. Our IG team serves as the eyes and ears of our commanding general, General Michael Garrett. To meet these expectations, we interact with members of the FORSCOM community in a variety of ways at all levels and on myriad topics. In our role as inspectors, we look at our organizations and programs to assess them against existing guidance. We also assess organizational climate to identify trends and systemic factors affecting our units and our people. Our assessments inform FORSCOM leader actions and decision-making. On June 27, 2020, General Garrett directed me to lead an inspection of the SHARP program and command climate at Fort Hood. General Garrett's intent was consistent with this type of short-notice inspection, to as quickly and accurately as possible identify any critical issues, to help Fort Hood leaders understand the strengths and weaknesses of their SHARP program and the installation environment, and to recommend specific actions to make improvements. 6 personnel from the FORSCOM IG conducted the inspection, augmented by a SHARP trainer and a Special Victim Counsel from 18th Airborne Corps at Fort Bragg. Our inspection methodology included a written survey of over 225 soldiers from 12 battalions and 6 brigades. We conducted 14 small group sensing sessions and command team interviews with 4 battalions and 2 brigades, gathering inputs from nearly 200 soldiers and leaders. Additionally, we conducted 16 sessions with SHARP program personnel from company to corps level. In all, we had touch points with nearly 450 personnel from across Fort Hood. Our inspection was not able to fully incorporate Specialist Guillen's unit, the 3rd Cavalry Regiment. We were scheduled to complete the inspection of the unit on July 1st. However, the tragic developments in the Specialist Guillen case the evening prior and very early that morning caused us to reconsider our plan. I advised, and General Garrett concurred, that due to those developments' impacts on the soldiers of the 3CR, we should not complete the inspection of the unit at that time. Though we believe our findings reflect the SHARP program and command climate across Fort Hood, we acknowledge that conditions within the 3CR could differ somewhat from those observed for the rest of the post. Therefore, General Garrett directed that our team return to Fort Hood on July 27th and 28th to complete our inspection of the 3CR. Our team, led this time by my deputy and our IG Sergeant Major, is returning from Fort Hood today and will continue the analysis of the collected data upon their return. At Fort Hood, we observed a SHARP program needing to improve in certain areas, but one which units generally execute to standard. We observed consistent demonstration of program knowledge and awareness of reporting procedures. Importantly, most soldiers said they would report if sexually harassed. Most would report if sexually assaulted, and nearly all said that leaders take reports of sexual harassment and assault seriously. Our team did identify areas needing improvement. A few soldiers indicated a hesitancy to report SHARP incidents for several disparate reasons. Some soldiers expressed that junior leaders in particular lacked the practical experience to respond to a sexual harassment or assault incident. Extended hiring timelines for new SHARP program personnel can result in episodically unfilled positions. Finally, some soldiers indicated that the SHARP training they receive is repetitious and unimaginative. Our team made several recommendations to improve the SHARP program and reinforce soldiers' trust in the process and in the chain of command. Fort Hood leaders were receptive and committed to making the necessary changes to address identified shortfalls. In conclusion, no single inspection can be definitive. We believe our inspection results provide an accurate assessment of the SHARP program and climate at Fort Hood. While differences may exist in individual units, Fort Hood overall is meeting the standards prescribed by Army regulations and policies, and the FORSCOM team is committed to improvements. Again, I appreciate the subcommittee's invitation to appear today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Colonel. I yield myself 5 minutes. Dr. Galbraith, we have spent many, many hours together over the last 8 or 10 years. I have a great deal of respect for you. I am deeply troubled, however, by the statement you made in your prepared remarks, in which you said, estimated prevalence rates of sexual assault in the Department of Defense have decreased by over 1/3 in the past 14 years. So I pulled the figures. In fiscal year 2002, for service women, the prevalence rate was 24%. In 2006, the year you quoted, it was 34%. In 2010, it was 21%. In 2014, it was 21.4%. In 2016, it was 21.4%. In 2018, it was 24.2%. So if you look at the data, it hasn't gotten better. You, I fear, plucked this high watermark to make the case that somehow we're doing better, when in fact we aren't doing any better. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, ma'am. I would agree with you that the rates that you quoted for sexual harassment have not changed. The data that I was citing in my prepared statement were for rates of sexual assault over the past 14 years, and we have seen decreases in the prevalence of those. But you're absolutely right. There is no decrease in the prevalence of sexual harassment that we've seen sustained over time.
And you're saying if I went back to look at the sexual assault data, we're not going to see a similar listing of data, that it has dramatically decreased?
It has decreased, ma'am, yes.
All right, I'm going to look that up, and we'll,
Yes, please.
before the hearing's over, we'll get back to it. So the inspection at Fort Hood found that survey respondents did not trust their immediate supervisors to handle a sexual harassment or sexual assault incident. Junior supervisors also reported that they themselves did not feel equipped to handle an incident despite training. Your report also indicates that we need to create a focus on this. What do we need to do?
Everyone has to understand the message that sexual assault, sexual harassment aren't tolerated, but it's more than that. We're not born with the skills to necessarily understand what's acceptable and what's not acceptable when we deal with people on an everyday basis. Leaders aren't necessarily born with these skills, and followers aren't necessarily born with these skills to be able to confront people productively, but yet have rational discussions about what is offensive to them. We bring people in from the service from a wide variety of backgrounds. So for that purpose, leaders absolutely need the tools to be able to detect what problems that they have in their units. And through that, we have been revising our climate surveys to help them really identify those topics that are challenging for leaders and to move the needle. In addition to that, our junior supervisors, our newest people who see our folks at greatest risk for sexual assault and sexual harassment every day, they also need those skills to be able to understand what sexual harassment looks like, how to shut it down, and how to encourage everyone to participate in a unit that is and grow respect and dignity and inclusion. In addition to that, we have
Actually,
to from our,
Doctor, I'm going to have to leave it there because I would like to ask a question of Colonel Wimpey. Colonel, we talked last night, and you indicated to me that you had these listening sessions and talked to over 223 service members. Is that correct? Yes. And the service members were mixed in terms of gender, correct?
That is correct, Madam Chair.
So, as we said last night, to get a real fulsome evaluation would require separating out the women so they could talk with a sense of an ability to talk freely without having it create retaliatory actions. Do you recognize that that might have been a better purpose, a better way of handling it?
Madam Chair, I certainly acknowledge the point. What gave us confidence that we were getting good inputs from all soldiers in those sensing sessions was the very good alignment with the results we got from the anonymous surveys, which were entirely anonymous. And so the results were consistent on trust in the chain of command and willingness to report between the anonymous surveys and the information that we were hearing soldiers in sensing sessions. And so I absolutely acknowledge the point of the value of the gender-specific sensing sessions. In this case, there was good correlation between the subjective information we got and the survey information.
Well, you also said that 18 of the 52 women surveyed, more than a third, reported being sexually harassed. But why doesn't your data report include the data on any gender-specific way so that we can look at how female soldiers feel as compared to male soldiers?
The inspection report that we provided was actually provided to General Garrett, which is our norm. We provide it to our commander who directs us to do the inspections. And in this case, the inspection was really focused on the broader climate at Fort Hood and their execution of the SHARP program at Fort Hood. And we needed to provide him some answers fairly quickly so he would know if there was an immediate problem that needed to be addressed immediately at Fort Hood. And so our inspection report really focused on the major points that we thought were important. The level of trust in their leadership, which was high, 94% based on the survey. Willingness to report, which although still not 100%, and we still have challenges there. The willingness to report both assault and harassment incidents was also high, 86% and 87% respectively. And so based on the survey we did, and the subjective information and anecdotal information that we got from soldiers that we talked to them, we felt that for the purposes of this inspection, that immediate initial look at Fort Hood and their program, we felt that answered the immediate questions that needed to be answered. We don't necessarily promote our inspection report as the definitive answer.
All right, thank you, Colonel. My time has expired. Ranking Member Kelly.
Thank you again, Chairwoman Spear. I want to talk just a little bit. It sounds like that there is a lot of confidence at Fort Hood in leaders who are at the company and higher level, and that any amount of dissatisfaction is with those at the lieutenant platoon level or at squad level or at some lower level, the junior leaders. I think it's important for people to understand that in perspective. A second lieutenant probably has 6 months of experience in the Army or in the Navy, an ensign in that case. But they're coming from a culture, and we like to always focus on our service academies, but I would say that probably 80% of our officers are commissioned from services outside of the academy, if not a greater number, and most of them come from colleges and universities and ROTC. There are exceptions. You have some coming from OCS. I would also state that most of the issues are with soldiers who have been in for less than 2 years, so they have brought a culture with them. I see our senior leadership, that's General McConville, General Garrett, who I know and is a superb leader. I see a much greater focus across DOD from the senior level leadership where they are no longer giving lip service. Do you see that, Colonel Wimpey or Dr. Galbraith, where our senior leadership, our senior enlisted leaders are pushing down, we will not tolerate? Do you see that in application?
As a matter of fact, I do. I regularly train individuals in the ranks of 05 to 06, E7 to E9, and also senior GS civilians, ranks 13 to GS 13 to 15. And the changes that I've seen over the past 10 years are substantive, that the fluency, their understanding of the problem of sexual assault is increased substantially. They could probably use a little bit more help with sexual harassment and understanding what to do there, but yes, I've seen a great change.
And which brings me to my next point. We need to do a better job of the PMSs, the primary military specialist, or the colonel who is in charge of our ROTC programs. We need to do a better job in our selection of drill instructors or people who are responsible for these young men and women who come into our service. I'm telling you, we've got to teach it from day one. We've got to let them know that it will not be tolerated in our Army. So I just ask that you refocus your efforts because our problems have changed over time. I'm not saying that they've gone away, they have changed. They went from the senior leadership endorsing, tailhook, other examples, to now it's at the junior, the people coming in, bringing their culture with them. And I will say the only way to eradicate that problem is to send PMSs to our colleges and universities, which most people come, is to, at basic training, our drill instructors who teach from day one. That means more women. That means more minorities. That means in those positions. They used to be looked at, if you got a PMS, that was not a good assignment. It may be the end of your career. We need to change that dynamic so that when you get a PMS job, it means the senior leadership of the Army trusts you the most to bring in our most crucial asset, our individuals. Tell me what you think about that, Colonel Wimpey.
Congressman, I'll speak to what we saw in terms of awareness and the focus on the issue. I'll speak to what we saw at Fort Hood during the inspection. As I mentioned, the trust, as expressed to us, both through survey and through the actual discussions, the trust in the leaders was high. The awareness and the emphasis on the challenge of SHARP and the problems that presented, that awareness was very high. Soldiers were very conversant, very aware of the SHARP program, the processes, their opportunities to report, and their mechanisms to report. So what we took away from that was that there was a priority on SHARP at Fort Hood. The concern is expressed to us by soldiers with those junior level leaders, as they expressed it to us, was not one of trust per se. It was that they trusted their leaders to take it seriously, but those junior leaders may not have either the life experience or the military experience to deal with the situation as it was presented to them. And so our recommendation to get at that issue, as expressed to us, was really to focus some training on that first line supervisor, that junior leader, and the DOD initiative sounds like it is addressing that challenge.
And Colonel Wimpey, just very quickly with the few seconds that I have left, what that means is we have the greatest NCO Corps in the world. We are the greatest military in the world because of our non-commissioned officers. And I can tell you an E6 has adequate experience and life experiences. So maybe we need to shift the focus and we need to train sergeants. We need to train first sergeants, platoon sergeants, or the equivalent in the Navy. Those guys have the life experience and they're at the levels where they can impact that. They've got to trust their squad leaders, platoon platoon sergeants, and on up. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Davis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I express, as well as my colleagues, condolences to the family of Specialist Guillen and others. You know, I've been working with this as well for many, many years, and I remember some of the initial work that we did, and especially trying to create what became the Special Victims Council and Advocate. And that seemed to be something that, if nothing else, gave the victims the confidence that there was somebody there for them. Because I think what we heard was they felt extremely alone. Nobody would listen, and they really didn't believe that anybody cared. So that made some difference. But we're still struggling, aren't we? And we were often told, you know, you changed 9, major laws in regard to this, or 12, whatever the number was. People told us, wait, sit back, let us let this change things, and we're still at this. I remember, and I checked the date again because it was June 14th of 2013 when General Morrison in Australia told people, if you've got some sexist problems or issues, get out, and get out now. And that resonated with us here too, because we believed that maybe the messages are not strong enough from our leaders. And quite honestly, we didn't hear that, although I have to say that I had great respect for many of the generals that we were working with at that time. But you're citing the junior level folks. So that means we've got to look at the promotions. What is the climate under which they were working that they created in their units? And I know we've looked at this, we've talked about it, but somehow or other, that's not getting through. But I also check back to see, okay, so what's happening with Australia today? Are they doing a lot better than we are? And if you want to check that article, they're not, actually. And they're suggesting that the media is still acting on the belief that, quote, boys will be boys, and that the system is not going to change very much. I hope we're better than that, but I worry that as we continue to come back, that's not always the case. I'm pleased that you cited the fact that women are saying that they have more trust in some of their leaders and leaders that have gone further in the services. And I've heard that as well, especially in the Navy, because I've asked it a lot. But I've always been concerned that somehow when it comes to promotions that we're not looking at the right things. And we've got to do that. That's very important. So I wanted to go back and just very quickly, because I know my time is running out. Colonel Wimpey, are you planning to go back to Fort Hood and conduct an inspection of the unit of Specialist Guillen's unit, the 3rd Cavalry Regiment as well? Do we need to know more about that?
Congresswoman, we actually did send a team back this week, and in the last 2 days, they have been inspecting the 3CR unit, Specialist Guillen's unit, because we weren't able to inspect it when we were down there the first time in late June and early July. I think you can appreciate in this forum in particular, IGs operate by fairly strict regulations regarding the confidentiality that we receive, and we do that to protect soldiers and protect units because we need them to talk to us, and we have to protect them when they do. So it wouldn't be appropriate to talk details about 3CR specifically today, or at least great details, but we did return and do the inspection the last 2 days. The initial feedback that I got from our inspection team, led by my deputy, who is a very experienced IG, is that what they saw within 3CR was very well aligned with what we saw with the remainder of the post when we were down there the first time. Some slight variations in specific in the way they answered it, but no significant variances from what we saw. And just as importantly, they felt like they had very transparent and honest input from the soldiers in the sensing sessions they did with them.
Okay, thank you. My time is almost up. I was going to ask, and I'm sure others will, about the AWOL process and some specifics around that, because we had concerns about that at the last hearing. Thank you very much.
Mr. Berman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the hearing. Thanks for the subject, because the youth of our country is our future, period. I'd like you to just take this question for the record, unless you know it right off the top of your head. What percentage of the age-eligible youth, young people, enlist or seek to enlist in the military today? What percentage? And if you don't have it, that's fine. Take it for the record.
I'm sorry, sir, I don't have that.
Good. Take it for the record. And with that, I yield the rest of my time to Mr. Turner.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. When the story of Vanessa Guillen broke, my heart sank, because in my community, 13 years ago, the story was very similar. Maria Lauterbach came up missing. Stories began to circulate of the sexual assault that she had reported. The accused became the primary suspect, and her body was ultimately found in his backyard, where he had murdered her and burned her body. In this instance, with Vanessa, my heart sank, because once again, the question arises, has the military done anything wrong? In this instance, with Maria Lauterbach, there were things that really went wrong that we knew needed to be addressed. And I think our oversight, and Colonel Wimpey, it's so important in this investigation, that we need to look, what has DOD done, what did we know, what were we not doing, and what did we not do correctly? It's been my honor to work with Congresswoman Susan Davis on this issue. As a result of Maria Lauterbach's death, I got involved in this, worked with Susan Davis and others. We gave victims the ability to do an expedited transfer. We gave, as Congresswoman Davis was saying, victims their own counsel, and even standing in court, so the victims can have their own legal representation to guide them through this. We divided up our whole task into 3 categories. Prevention. How do we make certain that we lessen sexual assault and sexual harassment? Protection. How do we ensure that victims themselves have the tools that they need? And then prosecution, ensuring that those who perpetrate these crimes are held accountable. Now, surely we can tell that we're falling short. Dr. Galbraith, I have one question for you, though, to start, and that is, I fear that when we make it a gender issue, that we actually lessen the overall impact of sexual assault on men in the military. Now, you gave the percentages, and it's my understanding, Dr. Galbraith, that actually more men are assaulted than women.
Sir, that was the case up through 2016. 2018 was the first year that we saw fewer men sexually assaulted as far as numbers go than women.
Well, what I find interesting about the percentages and the extent is that when we talk about afraid to report, there's afraid to report in the system and retaliation, then there's also cultural. And so what are we doing to address this issue of assuring that, that people will feel that they can come forward? When Congresswoman Davis and I were at the Marine Commandant's residence, he was telling us what he was doing on sexual assault, but there was an officer, female, at the table who during the discussion said she herself would feel afraid to report. And that, of course, means that everybody's a victim, right? Even if you're not a victim of sexual assault, but if you believe that if you are assaulted, that that it's not worth it to come forward, that you're still a victim of the system. Dr. Galbraith, tell me what you're doing in this regard.
Absolutely. We're making it very clear from the very highest levels of leadership on down that encouraging people to come forward and report is much more than just saying make a report. We have to have systems that protect the confidentiality of people. And with restricted reporting, that's something that we did that actually brings in many, many more people than we ever recognized would come in to make a report just by offering them that confidential ability. In addition to that, we have to have highly trained people that when people do walk in the door, they're heard, they're respected, and they're assisted in the way that they want to. And then we have to have services that appeal to people, that really do make a difference in their lives.
With respect to harassment and the increase in reporting, as we try to shift our culture, wouldn't we want more reporting? Wouldn't we want people to be more critical of the environment that they're working in so that we'd have the ability for intervention? Because harassment can so easily translate into encouraging an environment that permits sexual assault.
Yes, sir. The policies that we put in place for sexual assault in 2006 quadrupled the number of service members that make a report every year now. That being said, we could do the same for sexual harassment.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank the gentleman. I really think that being accurate is really important on this issue. So I've had the staff give me the stats on sexual assault in the military since 2006. In 2006, it was 6.8% for women. In 2010, it was 4.4%. In 2012, it was 6.1%. In 2014, it was 4.9%. In 2016, it was 4.3%. In 2018, it was 6.2%. So it was 6.8% in 2006. It was 6.2% in 2018. That is not a third less. If what you are doing is combining women and men in the military to get that reduction of 1/3, I don't think that is fair. Now, for men, it went from 1.8% to 0.7% from 2006 to 2018. I think it's really important to be accurate and fair and not let the stats twist the truth. With that, Mr. Cisneros, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank our panel for being here today. I, too, was very disturbed by Vanessa Guillen's death, having lost a sister at a young age as well. It's something that's devastating for a family. And with that, I'll get right to my questions. Reportedly, for sexual assault and sexual harassment, the number of court-martials and NJP stayed about steady for 2018 and 2019, while the numbers of administrative actions rose, indicating in some instances commanders were choosing to either slap perpetrators on the wrist or unload them from the service rather than take appropriate disciplinary action. What can we do to ensure that commanders are properly investigating and responding to sexual assault, sexual harassment allegations?
Sir, for sexual assault, no commanders are allowed to investigate that crime. All allegations of sexual assault are required to be provided to the military criminal investigative organizations, OSI, CID, and NCIS. And that's been the department's policy since about 2006. For sexual harassment, when formal reports are made, you are correct that investigations are conducted at the command level. I think the best thing that's happened with that, though, is to ensure that the General Court-Martial convening authority over that individual command is notified of that formal harassment complaint, which means that it's in the light of day and other people's eyes are on it than just the command.
So the reports that are restricted, where survivors confidentially disclose an assault without starting an official investigation, saw a 17% increase from last year with 2,126 reports. Do you feel that the increase in restricted reports demonstrates a lack of faith in the chain of command?
Actually, sir, I believe it's the exact opposite. Our restricted reporters come forward because they see it as a viable way to protect their confidentiality. And as a matter of fact, we believe that any report is a good report from a standpoint of allowing our service members to get the care and the help that they need.
So if they had faith in the chain of command, why wouldn't they make it an official report?
Sir, our policy recognizes that reporting a sexual assault is a deeply personal decision. And so we empower everyone to make the decision that's right for them. We've got to respect that for some people, making a report will never be right. But for others, we give them every opportunity to come forward. And in addition to that, as a restricted reporter, you have the opportunity to convert your report to unrestricted and participate. And about a quarter of people do that every year. In addition to that, we've also employed the Catch a Serial Offender program for restricted reporters, which allows them to submit their name of their offender into a system, and if there's a match, then we contact them back and see if they'd like to participate in the justice system.
So sexual assault appears to be more prevalent among junior service members relatively new to the military. So what preventive efforts are in place to prepare leaders at all levels to better reach our youngest service members who are most at risk? And I believe that's part of what Colonel Wimpey was talking about. But how are we reaching our young junior personnel who are new to the military, and to let them know that this is not acceptable?
Absolutely. So we have a variety of ways that we go after this issue. At first of all, within 14 days of you joining the military, you're informed about the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Program. That's at basic training. Then when you go to your advanced school, you get additional information about what's acceptable and what's not as far as behavior goes. In addition to that, we've taken a number of different efforts since May of 2019 to ensure that our junior leaders and our first-line supervisors will have the skill to be able to address this behavior when they see it and shut it down. In addition to that, we are also providing commanders with new revised climate surveys that allow them to detect and then take action on challenges within their unit to protect those folks that are junior.
So is this training provided on an annual basis as well, while they're at their commands?
There is annual training, yes. Basic training is not annual, it's when you first come in.
Well, I know, but that's why I'm asking. Is there refresher training done every year?
Yes, sir.
Right. So, look, we heard from Vanessa Guillen's family. We hear from so many other individuals that she came forward and told her family members who she trusted that she was being sexually assaulted and didn't feel comfortable reporting that to her chain of command. And that's not uncommon, and we've heard that so many times here. We need to do something to change that. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I too share your reluctance in embracing restrictive reporting. I think it sends a message to the soldiers, don't rock the boat. Let's just give you the health care you need, and let's move forward. Let's just put this behind us. So I really am not a fan of it, but it is in the system today. I now yield 5 minutes to Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for another hearing about this issue. Thank you for your continued leadership and your partnership. I'm very, very grateful for it. To our witnesses in our panel, thank you for being here. All of us have been shocked and horrified about the news of Vanessa Guillen, and once again, my sincerest condolences to her family. Briefly, Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 letters from the Texas legislature calling on the U.S. Congress to investigate Specialist Vanessa Guillen's tragic disappearance and produce findings with utmost transparency. The first from the Texas House Women's Health Caucus, the second from the Texas Senate Hispanic Caucus.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, have called on Congress for an investigation along with our chairwoman. Gentlemen, right after, as the chairwoman mentioned, right after the discovery of Vanessa Guillen's murder and as the brutal details became public, you saw women all over the country talking about their experiences on social media and on Zoom conversations. I had my own conversations at home, and one of really an alarming component of the conversation that I had with one soldier. She talked about the incredible frustration that she and her colleagues have in knowing that sexual assaults are not either fully investigated, or they feel that there's not justice attached to those investigations. And so she said, why bother reporting sexual harassment if the results with regard to sexual assault are so terrible. And she said, in fact, that she's been deployed, and she said that she knew that there was basically a war outside the wire that she was prepared for, but there was one inside the wire she was not prepared for, just for context. So, Colonel Wimpey, I want to ask you specifically, the FORSCOM IG report indicates that most soldiers responded that they would report assaults, that 86% would report assaults. However, the same investigation shows that just 50% of those who were assaulted in the last year actually reported it. I didn't see that your recommendation addressed this issue. Why not? And also, how should DOD and SHARP address this disparity?
Congresswoman, if I could just make a point to clarify, what we did was an inspection rather than an investigation, which in the IG realm are two distinctly different things. So for the inspection that we did, it did indicate that only 50% of those that had been assaulted reported, but yet 86% indicated that if they were reported, or if they were assaulted, they would report. I think the statistic is a little bit misleading because it was such a small sample size for those that had been assaulted. There were 4 of that survey group that had been assaulted, and 2 of those had reported. So it was a very small sample size, and because it was an anonymous survey, we weren't able to dig into those cases specifically as to why or why not they didn't report. More broadly, and I think it is a very important point, even though 86% in the case of sexual assault indicated that they would report, and 87% indicated that they had reported if they had been a victim. And so we make some assessments based on that. That in no way discredits the story or the experience of an individual soldier, because we know the incidents occur, and we know that not everybody reports. So even though our assessments indicate the propensity to report is very high, that in no way detracts from those that choose not to report for whatever reason. In terms of that difference between a very high level of trust in command, but a still high but lesser level of those willing to report either harassment or assault, in the sensing sessions, we really tried to understand why that was, why there would be that disparity between the trust level and the willingness to report. And what we found, what soldiers told us, it broke down into a number of different reasons. Deeply personal decision that is being made by somebody who has experienced a significant event. And there wasn't any one reason of those that stood out to us as to why they would not report if they had experienced an incident.
Colonel, and just super quickly, have any of the recommendations you made been adopted?
We had. Congresswoman, they're doing planning down there already in terms of how to implement, particularly some of the training recommendations that we made. Additionally, some of the other programmatic recommendations that we made about the processing of new SHARP program personnel, our team actually looked into that earlier this week while they were down there for the revisit. And it appears that our team did not see a specific reason for a backlog in the processing. It was just a process that is very deliberate and very, very careful about who ultimately goes into those SHARP program positions.
Colonel, I'm out of time. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Escobar. Ms. Loria, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I would just like to start by saying that, I entered the military on July 1st, 1993. And I feel like in all those years since then, and in the 20 years I served, very little has actually changed in what is happening. You talk over and over again about the programs you've implemented. I lived through that. I lived through those changes, the implementation, and all of them. But I truly feel like we actually have to do something differently. And I applaud Chairwoman Spear for an effort that she put into this year's NDAA that Ms. Sherrill and I, also a Naval Academy graduate, supported. And we would like to look at how that type of change of an independent prosecutor or something in addition to supplement, to help with this problem with the chain of command can help with this situation in the future and people's ability to report. And I would like to yield the remainder of my time to Ms. Sherrill.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Luria. I couldn't agree more. It feels like many of the issues that I heard about in 1990 when I was 18 years old and entered the academy, we are still talking about today. And I'd like to mention some things. I'm going to have to head down to the floor after this, so I do want to quickly say thank you so much to Ms. Delgadio for coming today. She is a from my state of New Jersey. She has stood up for women throughout New Jersey for many years now, and now I'm proud that she's come to stand for women throughout the nation. So thank you so much for coming today. Something that Chairwoman Spears said that has me very concerned is in your finding, about 18 of the roughly 50 women reported being sexually harassed. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Congresswoman.
And you said that the majority of women in your survey would report this. They told you they would report sexual or harassment. Is that correct?
Yes, that is also correct.
And so have there been reports from over 1/3 of the women on the base that they have been sexually harassed? Is that what the reporting has told us?
Congresswoman, I would have to take that for the record. We did not look at the overall reporting percentages or prevalence at Fort Hood as part of our inspection, so I would have to take that for the record.
Could you please take that for the record? Because it occurs to me that that would be a good way to check your survey to determine if, in fact, that women are really feeling free to come forward. And I would suggest that if over 1/3 of the women on Fort Hood are reporting being sexually harassed, that is certainly a real concern of mine and something that really has to have further looking into. I also want to focus on the finding that the SHARP program at Fort Hood is operating to standard. Was that your finding?
Yes, it was.
If that's true, it really leads to serious questions about the usefulness of the Army standard itself, given that if a SHARP program is operating at standard missed the sexual assault and eventual murder of a soldier at Fort Hood, the standard is flawed. So what steps are being taken by the Army to assess that standard itself, and what changes would you recommend?
Congresswoman, our inspection did not look at the actual policies or regulations themselves. We strictly looked at the unit's ability and their level of execution against those standards. I would have to defer to others in terms of any initiatives or movements within the Army to change the standard itself. I do think, however, having said that we didn't look at the specific standards. If the intent of the policies and regulations is to maintain focus on the topic of SHARP and the prevention of incidents and the reporting of incidents, what we saw was in the units that we talked to, we did see a lot of awareness of the topic, a lot of engagement and investment in that topic at all levels of the soldiers that we talked to, and an absolute appreciation of the priority that needs to be placed on it. We did see that. So in that respect, I think the intent of the standards as they pertain to soldiers and how they view SHARP, I think what we saw at Fort Hood indicates that it was having a very good effect, notwithstanding the effect that, or the broader point that it may not be having the entire effect that we're looking for.
I think maybe our measurements of good effect need to be adjusted. Simply, if we're seeing reporting of over 1/3 of the women being sexually harassed, if we have a murder that took place on Fort Hood, I have grave concerns about how we're measuring success in this instance, and I think we're failing, quite frankly. So my time is up, and I yield back, but thank you so much for your testimony today.
Thank the gentlelady. Colonel, it's true that there is a SHARP program, that people know about the SHARP program, so you were able to check those boxes. But you also, I think, in your report indicated that is it the SHARP 360 program? Are you familiar with that? The one where they have an actual facility there, they create a bar, a motor pool, and act out, that wasn't well known to any of the people or very few of the people that you actually interviewed. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And we were not aware of it before we got down there. One of the SHARP program people that we interviewed on the first day mentioned it. Our team went and took a look, and our team was very impressed with the platform for SHARP training that facility provides. And the few soldiers that had gone through small group training at that facility spoke very, very well about the facility. But it's absolutely true, it was not well known. Even the existence of the facility
All right,
was
and the
not
SHARP
well.
program is online for the most part?
In terms of the regulations and the policies, what that requires of the units, yes, Madam Chair, it was online from what we saw.
Thank you. Ms. Holland, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you for convening today's hearing. As a mother, as an Indigenous woman, and as a proud member of this committee, I'm deeply saddened and disturbed to hear about the loss of Specialist Vanessa Guillen. And I understand I'm not alone in feeling this way. I send my heartfelt condolences to Gloria and Myra, Vanessa's mother and sister, to the men and women in our military communities and our witnesses here today who are also grieving and searching for answers. I, too, wish that circumstances were different and that Congress could have done more sooner to address the pervasive climate of sexual harassment and assault in our military. I hope today's hearing will lead us down a relentless path towards swift military justice reforms, which from my colleagues saying they have waited a long time for these things, and protections for all of our men and women who serve. Colonel Wimpey, I understand the Inspector General's inspection at Fort Hood concluded the SHARP program is executed as prescribed and meets Army standards. Yet many military women have come forward to share their own personal stories of sexual harassment and a sexual assault. These women have shared they've been overlooked and silenced. How do you rectify your findings with the real lived experiences of these women? And is there something that's being overlooked?
Congresswoman, the execution of the program to standard, sort of the programmatics of the SHARP program, that was one of the objectives that we looked at. And that was really focused on, are they doing the training? Are they doing the training consistently? What is the level of awareness of soldiers of the SHARP program itself? And all of that was very strong from what we saw with the units that we inspected. Probably more critical for the question may be that the objective of our inspection that also looked at climate, because so much of a climate affects not just whether or not the incidents happen, but what happens after an incident happens. And so we put a lot of focus on that objective, the one of climate. And although it is true that both from the survey information and the subjective information we got from talking to soldiers, trust in the leaders to take it seriously was very high. Trust in the willingness to report was also high. That doesn't preclude the experience of individual soldiers. And we know that incidents are still occurring. I mean, common sense says that, our survey indicated that, and certainly the DoD statistics indicate that. So we know that incidents are still occurring. We know that there is work to do, really focusing, I think, on that 16 or 17% and why they are not reporting and how we can make it more comfortable or easier for them to report. I think that's very important. So that we really understand the problem and its scope better than we do now.
I'm just curious, have you personally read any of the Me Too military stories that are out there?
I'm not on social media. I've not read them directly. I've certainly read a lot of the press reporting about those stories that have been on the social media.
Me Too stories are very personal. They're from the women themselves, and I would encourage you to take a look at some of those because I think they'd be very informative. Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. Mr. Crow, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, for holding this really important hearing on a critical issue for our military and our young men and women. The military goes to great lengths to instill esprit de corps, to instill culture among its ranks, When I was a young enlisted soldier, my career started when I was in the enlisted ranks as a private. I remember going to basic training. And the amount of time that was spent learning knowledge. You were given this book, and you're told to memorize the Army song, Army history, the great battles in American history. You memorize the ranks, the command structure. You know, it's a reflection of the priorities of the force, where you spend your time. And instruction was broken down by the hour. You know, X number of hours on marksmanship, X number of hours on physical fitness, and where we spend our resources. So with that in mind, I'm concerned that our time and resources still do not adequately reflect the priority and the urgency of this issue. Dr. Galbraith, you said that within 14 days, new recruits are informed about the program, and then when they go to their advanced training, they're provided, quote, additional information about the program. So can you shed some additional light for me as to how many hours of instruction and how much time is spent for these new recruits who get their first exposure to military culture and the priorities of our force to instill in them how critical this issue is?
I don't have that number on me because this is a service equity that they all execute just a bit differently, but it is, once again, there's a substantial amount of time spent. I just don't know what it is per service.
I would think you would want to know that. I mean, you are one of the top leaders in the program that's designed to instill accountability into our force, and I understand that there are some disparities, but this starts from day one.
It does.
And I'm dismayed, to say the least, that you don't know how much time and effort is spent instilling culture and priorities on our recruits from the first day they step off that bus, right? Because when you get yelled at by the drill sergeant,
right,
it's a reflection of the priorities of the force. But we're clearly not doing that with an issue of critical importance that goes to the esprit de corps, the values, the culture, and the morality of our military. So I want, for the record, to get that information from you, and I want to know that this will remain a priority. Dr. Galbraith, can you tell me how many of the SHARP representatives throughout the force, I believe at the GS level, they start at the brigade level, how many of those are women?
The vast majority of them are women. I don't have the exact percentage of what the gender breakdown is, but...
So it's over 50%?
That is my understanding.
Okay, vast majority is all that you know. Okay, again, that's a number I would expect you to know, because that's important, because that's also a reflection of the priorities of our force and how we're allocating our resources, and I would expect as a leader of this organization that you would have that information. That you would know how many women are out there within our units actually addressing this issue. The last part, question I'd like to make is actually dovetailing on the ranking member, General Kelly's comments about the impact of NCOs, because we've talked a lot about the officer corps, and certainly, the buck stops with the officers. But the NCOs are critical. I could not agree more with General Kelly's comment that if you want to know what's going on in a barracks, if you want to know what's going on during off hours on the weekend, it's our sergeants, our NCOs that know what's going on within the units. And I don't believe that we are adequately training and equipping the NCO Corps through the NCO development system and education system to lead on this issue. So my last statement would actually be a request that we figure out a way to better equip the NCO Corps and use them as kind of our eyes and ears and tools on the front line to address this crisis. So thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Ms. Garcia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for your leadership on this issue and for agreeing to let me to weigh in since I do not serve on this committee. And with that said, gentlemen, if I get some of the acronyms wrong, please bear with me because I'm not a member of this committee. But Madam Chair, your leadership on this issue has been consistent in your support. As the member who represents the Guillen family in Houston, I can tell you that they know that you're there with them and that this committee is supportive, because not only does the family grieve, Houston grieves, the nation grieves. You know, when we see a march in Houston of 3,000 people in the middle of the heat, but we also see marches across America, about 40 or 50 on one Saturday. This is a topic that's very, very, very concerning to many, many people. I'm going to pick up where my colleague, Representative Merrill, left off. When were these standards or criteria for reviews or inspections, when were those developed? Just quickly, the year.
Congressman, I believe the DOD level standard was last updated in May of 2017, I believe.
2017. So is there a below standard, above standard, or is that the only option?
The policy, both DOD and Army, prescribes what the requirements are for training and for programmatic things.
I know,
so
but for you to decide whether the programs are working, is the only option that they meet standard or not standard? Like, I'm used to performance reviews. There's above standard, there's below standard, or needs improvement. I mean, they're either standard or not standard.
In our methodology as IGs, it's because we deal with so much subjective information as we receive it from soldiers.
Right.
It is our assessment that we make about whether or not it's meeting the standard it includes some empirical information, but it also includes a lot of subjective information from the soldiers. And so we just make our assessment.
So that is the only option.
That is correct.
Right. Well, because it is disappointing, as Representative Merrill said, that if it is standard, that there would still be about 1/3 or more that are not reporting. And if you look at, especially I looked at the, I also don't understand the difference between a formal complaint and informal complaint on sexual harassment.
In dealing with sexual harassment, specifically, the formal complaint would be one that they would make to the chain of command or
Right.
potentially to a VA, and it would go through the formalized process of an investigation and then whatever.
Well, tell me about informal.
Informal would be the soldier, for timeliness purposes, the ideal is a soldier deals with it immediately and the issue gets remedied immediately.
It wouldn't be that she told her parents. It wouldn't be that she told her sisters. It wouldn't be that she told friends on the base. That's informal, in my view.
Informal in this context from the Army, it would be reaching out to somebody that within the unit or at that institution.
So if she told a member of her unit and her unit was not in the survey, correct?
That survey was just completed with her unit the previous 2 days, and
Right.
the team is returning.
But if she told someone in her unit, that would be informal.
A victim would have the option of making, regardless of who they told, they would have the
Well,
option
sir,
of making
it's a very
formal or
direct
informal.
question. If she did share her story with friends in her unit, is that an informal complaint?
It could be unless she intended it to be a formal complaint.
Well, we certainly don't know her intent. She cannot tell us her intent. If she could tell her story, we probably wouldn't have to have this hearing, but unfortunately, she's not with us. So if she told her friends at the unit or someone there on the base, is that an informal complaint?
If she did not express the intent to make it a formal complaint, then that would fall into the...
So you're saying that someone would have to go and say, Sheila, you know what, I was sexually assaulted yesterday, but I don't want to make that an informal complaint? Someone has to consciously say that they want to make it an informal complaint? It seems a little...
The victim has the option of either making it formal
Right.
or informal.
Well,
that's their decision.
Well, it's really disturbing to me that the numbers still don't look good. And when I looked at your, I guess it's Appendix F of the report, what did catch my eye is this formal, informal complaint and how it intermixes with your numbers, because then you also have anonymous complaints. So I won't ask you about those because I'm sure that I'll hear that the victim had to have some conscious level of saying it was anonymous. But I, like the Representative Cheryl, think that you all need to rethink your assessments, something other than just standard, because obviously, you know, that doesn't quite meet today's demands. You know, I don't know what the history is of how those were developed, but I think if we're going to look at making change, that's maybe one of the institutional changes that we need to make. Then I want to quickly ask Mr. Galbraith, you mentioned that in response to my colleague that there was a very great number of women that were SHARP officers or program managers.
Sexual assault victim
Right.
advocates.
Are any of those women of color?
Yes, they are.
Do we know about
I have
how many?
22,000 sexual assault victim advocates. About 2,500 are full-time members, and some of them are people of color. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then I want to go back to you, Colonel. You said that you did an inspection, but it's not an investigation because you wanted to make sure that we quickly went in there and saw what's going on at Fort Hood. And you started June 23rd? No, July 27th?
We arrived and began work June 29th at Fort.
June 29th. Now, that's not really in a hurry, is it? Because she went missing April 22nd. I sent a letter of inquiry May 23rd. I visited Fort Hood June 23rd. But yet 4 months later is when you started your inquiry. Does it usually take that long? Because news reports from the very, very beginning mentioned sexual harassment. Her family shared that story from the very, very start. Why did it take so long for y'all to try to go in and look at this snapshot to see what's going on in case you needed to do something?
All right, Ms. Garcia, we're going to have to ask for a very short answer. Because
Okay, great, thank you.
The investigative efforts began immediately, and we were not part of the investigation by CID, so I can't really speak to their timeline or their details.
No, sir, I was asking about yours on sexual harassment.
Our inspection was really to look at the climate at Fort Hood.
But it was
based on all the
General,
concerns that had been
it was
raised.
General Garrett that assigned you that task, correct?
That's correct,
All
Madam
right.
Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you so very much for your stupendous leadership and certainly the opportunity that has been given to women members and men members of the United States Congress to work with you on this extremely important work. Thank you to Congresswoman Davis, who has led this effort, and we have had the opportunity to work with Susan as well. I join my neighbor and dear friend, Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia, who has given stupendous leadership, tragically, to this issue, and my fellow colleague, Congresswoman Escobar. I, too, have come on this committee because of the enormous pain that the whole community, the whole state of Texas, and of course now the nation, feels about Vanessa. So my colleague has pointed and focused on some questions that I would like to follow up on, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that we all saw what kind of vibrant young soldier that the nation lost. This represents a youngster who in high school was the best athlete. There were men who said, I can't believe how athletic, how strong she was, who the minute she graduated from high school on June 9th, she shortly shipped off for basic training. A true patriot and a family who came to America and did all they could for their children, true contributors to the infrastructure of this nation. I think what pains me is that she was missing for 70 days, and of course the gruesome brutality of her murder. And so I want to focus my deepest sympathy to her family and my continued partnership, collaboration with Congresswoman Garcia, and to join on legislation that I think is absolutely imperative. So I want to, though you were I understand Congressman Spear mentioned another general that was engaged, but I just want to read this sentence into the record, or this paragraph. Army officials say Guillen never reported sexual harassment through official channels. She told her mother near the end that a sergeant had been harassing her. She told her best friend that a soldier had walked in on her in a shower. That is well known throughout Houston. It is very painful. But she wasn't going to file a complaint, she told her mother. Her superiors would laugh or brush it off if she said something. She bristled at the idea of quitting the Army. She would not violate her oath. And so we have a real problem. My colleague pursued informal. This is not a complete system. If you have young soldiers, male or females, but in this instance saying her superiors would laugh or brush it off, then did your study pierce into, as Congressman Crow said, I think he called them the sergeants and NCOs, did you pierce into, did you try to understand, to break that culture? Did you interview, and out of that report, did you develop policies that do not go to the umbrella, the base commander, but get to the individual NCOs? Because we lost a life because some young soldier, so athletic, thought that they would bristle or that they would laugh it off. That's number one question. I want to get this other one in. I think there was a number that you were able to get everyone, or you thought you reached everyone except 16 to 17%. I just need to get that explained. Leaving that number of people still impacted by sexual harassment means that you've got thousands of soldiers, because we have millions of soldiers that may be impacted by the failure of real policies of dealing with ending sexual harassment. And then the last question would be, you know, it's trending upwards, as I understand. What are we doing to get it to stop trending? But the first question is really, how did you assess or pierce where Vanessa was for her to have relief?
All right. Ms. Jackson Lee has 11 seconds. See if you can fill those.
In the case of our inspection, Congresswoman, we did ask those questions. Again, trust in the leadership indicated to us by soldiers was very high. And then in the sensing sessions and interviews with them, we tried to really bore into why they would not report. And again, a variety of reasons, very personal decisions as to why that wouldn't report. Certainly concern about how they would be perceived by others was one of those various reasons that they indicated they would not report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to join with Congressman Crow to say that we need to deal with these sergeants and NCOs. There has got to be a better culture for young people in the enlisted men and women. I thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank our two witnesses for your testimony today. I think it's very important as we study this issue to recognize that Colonel Wimpey's investigation was not scientifically based, and you cannot extract from that that it is relevant to the entire force. I think you would agree with that, Dr. Galbraith, correct? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll now have our second panel come forward.